What if the price you pay at the pump was directly connected to the wars of tomorrow? It might sound like a conspiracy theory, but the data paints a chilling picture. When the global price of crude oil skyrockets, two dangerous things tend to happen at once. First, nations rich in oil, suddenly flush with cash, get bold. They start bankrolling devastating new wars and foreign interventions. At the exact same time, energy-starved nations, facing economic collapse, get desperate enough to launch invasions of their own, scrambling to capture the resources they can no longer afford. This isn't a new phenomenon. It's a deadly feedback loop that has shaped global conflict for more than 50 years. A cycle where battles over black gold, pipelines, and shipping lanes can escalate with terrifying speed. And it all started the day the world was first held hostage by its own addiction to oil, a day that fundamentally rewrote the rules of war and peace. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to October 1973. The post-war economic boom was humming along, and the West, especially the United States, was powered by what seemed like limitless cheap oil from the Middle East. This reliance bred a dangerous sense of complacency that was about to change. On October 6, 1973, the holy day of Yom Kippur, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel to reclaim territory lost in the 1967 Six-Day War. The U.S., under President Richard Nixon, responded with Operation Nickel Grass, a massive airlift to resupply the Israeli military. Nixon's request for $2.2 billion in emergency aid for his ally was a decision that would send shockwaves far beyond the battlefields. Watching all of this unfold were the members of OAPEC, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries. For years, they had seen Western powers extract their natural wealth with little to no political leverage in return. America's open support for Israel was the final straw. Led by Saudi Arabia, OAPEC made a historic choice. They would turn their oil into a weapon. On October 19th, OPEC announced a full oil embargo against the U.S. and other nations that supported Israel, including Canada and the UK. But this was more than just an export ban. It came with massive production cuts. By the early 70s, OPEC had learned to coordinate these cuts, giving them the power to effectively set global prices. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The price of a barrel of oil didn't just rise, it quadrupled, jumping from around $3 to nearly $12 by early 1974. This price shock sent the world economy, built on cheap energy, into a tailspin. In the United States, the impact was visceral. Long lines snaked for blocks around gas stations. Fuel shortages became normal. The government even imposed a national 55-mile-per-hour speed limit just to conserve fuel. The long-term consequences were even more profound. The 1973 oil crisis plunged the global economy into stagflation, a toxic blend of stagnant growth and high inflation that many economists had thought was impossible. The embargo was lifted in March 1974, but the lesson had been seared into the minds of every leader on Earth. Control over oil meant control over the global economy. It was no longer just a commodity, it was a powerful tool for political blackmail. The precedent was set. Oil wasn't just something nations fought with, it was something they would fight for. The 1973 crisis showed the world how this threat had two faces. High oil prices can empower petrostates, giving them a war chest to fund aggressive foreign policy. At the same time, those high prices can push energy-dependent nations to the brink, making military action feel like the only way out. This dynamic would play out again and again. A textbook example? The Iran-Iraq War. The conflict, which kicked off in 1980, was a brutal 8-year war of attrition with complex roots. But one of Saddam Hussein's primary goals for invading Iran was to seize its oil-rich Khuzestan province. In 1979, the Iranian Revolution had thrown the region into turmoil. The pro-Western Shah was gone, replaced by an anti-Western government that immediately slashed oil production. This sent oil prices soaring for the second time in a decade, nearly tripling to $30.50 a barrel. Saddam Hussein, watching from next door, saw his chance. Flush with his own oil revenue and with Iran in revolutionary chaos, he figured he could make a quick grab for Khuzastan's oil fields and establish Iraq as the top power in the Persian Gulf. The war that followed was devastating, but it also introduced a new kind of oil warfare. Frustrated by the stalemate on the ground, both Iraq and Iran began attacking each other's economic lifelines. In what became known as the Tanker War, both sides attacked oil facilities and commercial ships in the Persian Gulf, trying to choke off the enemy's exports. With around 450 ships attacked, it became clear that not just oil fields but the routes used to transport the oil were now military targets. This brings us to the other side of the loop: desperation. By the late 1980s, the tables had turned. An oil glut had caused prices to crash. Iraq, crippled by its long war with Iran, was now saddled with a staggering $37 billion in debt, much of it owed to its small, oil-rich neighbor, Kuwait. Saddam grew increasingly aggressive. He accused Kuwait of waging economic war against Iraq by overproducing oil, driving down the global prices he desperately needed to rebuild his country. He even accused them of slant drilling, siphoning oil from a field that straddled their shared border. Iraq demanded Kuwait forgive its war debts. Kuwait refused. On August 1, 1990, talks broke down. Hours later, Iraqi tanks rolled across the border. Saddam's goal was clear: seize Kuwait's oil, cancel his debt, and assert his power. It was a blatant act of aggression fueled by economic desperation. The invasion triggered a massive international response, leading to the 1991 Gulf War. The Iran-Iraq War and the Gulf War are perfect examples of the feedback loop. High prices funded Saddam's initial aggression. The resulting instability eventually led to a price crash, which created the desperation that drove him to invade Kuwait, sparking yet another war. It's a vicious cycle where oil prices don't just influence conflict, they actively generate it. Today, the battlefield for oil isn't just fought on desert plains. It involves drone swarms, naval choke points, and cyber warfare. The players have changed, but the game is the same. Before we get into how these oil wars have evolved for the 21st century, if you're finding this breakdown useful, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. It helps us keep producing reports on the critical forces shaping our world. In the 21st century, the fight for oil hasn't gone away. It has just adapted. The battlefields are more complex, the weapons are more precise, and the stakes are higher than ever. One of the most critical new battlefields isn't even a country. It's a narrow strip of water called the Strait of Hormuz. This choke point between Iran and Oman is arguably the most important waterway on the planet. About 21 million barrels of oil, roughly a fifth of the world's daily supply, pass through it every single day. For Gulf producers like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait, it's the only way to get their oil to the open ocean. This makes it a permanent flashpoint. Any disruption, or even the threat of one, can send global oil prices into a frenzy. Iran, in particular, has repeatedly threatened to close the strait as leverage against sanctions or military pressure. And this isn't an empty threat. The region has seen repeated flare-ups, including attacks on oil tankers and the harassment of commercial ships. The vulnerability of this choke point means a local dispute can become a global crisis overnight. The weapons have also been upgraded. On September 14, 2019, the world witnessed the largest single-day oil supply disruption in history. A coordinated swarm of drones and cruise missiles struck two of Saudi Arabia's most vital oil facilities, Khurais and Abqaiq. The attack instantly knocked out 5.7 million barrels of daily production, over half of Saudi Arabia's output, and nearly 6% of the entire global supply. The price of Brent crude surged by nearly 20% in hours. And while the Saudis managed to restore production faster than anyone expected, the attack exposed a terrifying new reality. Critical energy infrastructure, once thought safe deep inside a country, was now vulnerable to cheap and precise drone attacks. Then there's the modern version of petroaggression, using energy as a weapon of blackmail. No one has mastered this better than Russia. For decades, Europe's deep reliance on Russian natural gas created a dangerous dependency. Moscow has repeatedly used this as a political weapon, manipulating supplies to coerce its neighbors. This was put on full display after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. As the West imposed sanctions, Russia drastically cut gas flows to Europe, hoping that soaring energy prices and the threat of a cold winter would fracture European unity and undermine support for Ukraine. Finally, new conflicts are brewing over untapped resources. The South China Sea is now one of the world's most dangerous flashpoints. Beneath its waters lie an estimated 11 billion barrels of oil and 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, though these figures are still debated. China's sweeping claims of sovereignty over nearly the entire sea have put it in direct conflict with its neighbors, including Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia. This is becoming increasingly militarized, with China building artificial islands and its coast guard harassing other nations' vessels near known oil and gas reserves. From drones over Saudi Arabia to naval standoffs in the South China Sea, the fight for oil has simply found new arenas. From the 1973 embargo that first turned oil into a weapon, to the invasions of Iran and Kuwait driven by ambition and desperation, the pattern is clear. High prices create the wealth for aggression, while price shocks create the desperation for it. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of conflict. We've watched this feedback loop evolve from tank battles to drone strikes, from fighting over oil fields to tense standoffs over pipelines and sea lanes. The core lesson from the last 50 years is that our global addiction to oil has repeatedly dragged us toward conflict. The price of this dependency is measured not just in dollars per barrel, but in human lives. This leads to a huge question. As the world slowly transitions to green energy, will these resource wars finally end? Or will the battle just shift to a new front? Will the conflicts of the future be fought not over oil, but over the lithium mines, cobalt deposits, and rare earth minerals needed for our new technologies? The history of oil wars teaches us one thing. Wherever there's a critical resource, there's a potential for conflict. The battle for energy might not be over. It may just be entering a new chapter. If you want to understand the next potential flashpoint in global energy, watch our deep dive on the strategic importance of the Arctic and its untapped resources. Thanks for watching.